Yes. Well, I find myself conflicted because as somebody who played a lot of cricket, I always enjoyed the badinage, the revelation of character. I quite enjoyed it when people lost their rag a bit. It was all part of the theatre of the thing. But I hated cheating. And I did have an ideal of how we should play. And to achieve that spirit of the game while allowing some of the emotions to spill over at times, I think it's quite a fine balance, isn't it? And sledging is an area where drawing that line in the right place is very difficult.
It's very difficult. Very difficult. Not that it's impossible, it's just difficult. Many things in life are difficult. Why should they be easy?
When you played, what was the... Did you ever feel that the sledging in your day got to a point where you thought people shouldn't be saying that to each other?
Well, I've thought it when I've heard reports of it, but I don't think I ever quite. I said one thing to Dennis Lilly once, and this wasn't even sledging actually, but what it was a one-day match. And he was batting and he set off for an impossible single, having hit the ball to me. And I threw the ball at the bowler's end and missed the stumps, and he would have been a yard out. And he sort of turned to the crowd and mocked me. And I said, I didn't think that was right. You know, I said it later, actually. I'm not straight away, I'm not in the course of the game. And he said, yes, he was sorry. You know, or it may have been Ian Chappell, but one of the other of them said, you know, they could see. Now that wasn't sledging, but it was kind of mocking an opponent in the eye of the world, and I thought that was slightly just not right and over the top. But it wasn't sledging, again, as I say in the book, I have a bit about it and about unsettling the opposition. And sport is, after all, competitive sport, if you're trying to win, is a matter of unsettling. You try and do the best you can to get somebody out or to get on top of them if you're batting. And the strut of a player, of a Viv Richards or a Shane Warne, was part of their armaments. The captain putting fielders in positions and not putting them in other positions indicated you can't hit the ball there. You know, I don't need anybody there for you. It's an obvious statement within the context of the game. Bringing on the bowler that keeps getting the same batsman out, as Australia did. They always brought on for Cullinan, you know, the South African batsman, Shane Warne. And Shane Warne would just sort of shrug his shoulders and said, you know, sort of indicate it's only a matter of number of, you know, handful of balls. And it usually was. And, you know, so you were unsettling, making him doubt his own ability or quality, making the batsman risk, taking risks that he wouldn't want to take, or going into his shell because he agrees that he's not very good with this message. And words could come into that, you know? I mean, you might say something within the hearing of the batsman, or I might anyway, and some people might. And again, there were grey areas. I was batting with Larry Gomes for Middlesex against Sussex. Tony Greig was captain of Sussex. This was before I played in the Test match, which would have been with Tony as captain, but he may well have been captain of England at the time. And Larry Gomes was probably in his first season, was a young lad, really. He wasn't, probably only about 19 or 20 years old. And I think Greig was bowling, and then Snow was bowling. And Greig was making very loud, abrasive comments about Larry Gomes being incompetent, not knowing anything about batting, and so on. And I said to Tony Greig, I thought that went beyond what, you know, a young player in county cricket, you know, that was a step too far. And he said, he again, a bit like Ian Chappell or Dennis, he said, yeah, I think you're right. I'm sorry, you know. And so there are limits, and the line is a tentative one drawn in the sand, and has to be.
But from what we read, there was a period where it seemed like people were making remarks of quite an unpleasant personal nature. And this phrase that Steve Waugh introduced about mental disintegration of the opposition.
Yeah, I think it's an unfortunate term, because actually you don't know what you're going to do. But if you do mentally disintegrate, as happened with Jonathan Trott, by his own admission and by his own honesty, in Australia and in the lead up to that tour, especially with Johnson, the fast bowler, and the whole Australian team. Who was the captain at that time? It was after
that time. It would have been Ricky Clark, not Ricky Clark, Michael Clark.
Michael Clark, yes.
Yeah.
I think that it was, this was unpleasant, over the top, difficult to draw the line. And then there was retaliation, I'll break your arm, I'll break your expletive deleted arm, perhaps the worst one I heard being was made to Johnny Bairstow, talking about his father's suicide. That's just so cheap and nasty,
Yes, but just going slightly away from that, but staying on the same theme, because this mental health in sport is talked about a lot now, and people are applauded for their honesty in saying that they have mental weaknesses. Probably when you started playing, whether you were mentally tough enough would have been part of the assessment of whether you would make a good cricketer or not.
Yes.
You wouldn't make allowances in that way for somebody who had mental difficulties. It would be a bit, saying somebody was weak under pressure would be a similar statement to he drops 3/4 of the catches that come his way.
Exactly. And the trouble is, there's some truth in it. That's the trouble. And that's the problem. And I think it's brave of people to say, look, there are times when, for reasons that go way beyond the cricket, actually, or in many cases they do. I don't know about Jonathan Trott, but with Marcus Trescothick, for example, they were to do with separation from his family and being on tour and being away for too long, and loneliness and feeling of anxiety about what was happening to his family and so on. And they can be uncontrollable and devastating, in the short or medium or even occasionally in the long term. And that it's a great thing about the stigma, about the lessening of the stigma of mental difficulty and mental illness or mental non-health, that these things can be talked about more frankly. But there is an intrinsic difficulty that sport does rely on, that kind of robustness, resilience. Sometimes it might even be arrogance, nobody's going to hurt me, don't think you can get to me. But those kinds of qualities that are part of the rich pattern of human behavior that is revealed on the cricket field that you and I enjoy, with its intensity and its passion and so on. And unsettling, which is a different word from disintegrating, is a real factor in sport. So if you're too easily unsettled, you're not going to be quite as good a player as you would be if you're more stable and more resilient. So
now, let's just take that into, obviously a captain plays a role in cricket, unlike in any other sport, I would suggest. And captaincy was something that interested you massively. In the context of people with fragile or robust egos, you had to manage two bowlers in your England team, Bob Willis and Ian Botham.
Yes.
Very different characters beneath the surface. Yes. And as a captain, tell us a little about that.
Well, one thing that we did with Ian from time to time, Lord Ian, was to gee him up. You know, and somebody like Peter Willey, who had a very engaging, snarling capacity from mid on, let's say, or mid off, I would say wind him up from slip, you see, and he would sort of snarl at him and said, "You're bowling like an old," well, we can't even say this now, an old woman. Sorry,
Yes.
excuse me for that. But you're bowling like my aunt or my grandmother or, you know, whatever, or grandfather, let's say.
Yes.
Oh my God, it's difficult, isn't it? Anyway, and Ian would sort of, he would sort of almost visibly lift his shoulders to disprove the point, and would run in with more purpose, vigor, find new energy, be more aggressive, usually almost always in a positive way from our point of view. And that worked. And there was a certain sort of belligerence, combativeness, confidence of a kind. You know, this is my scene, and I'm going to show them, and also resistance to being accused of anything that might. And I called him at Headingley in 1981 the sidestep queen, because I thought he got into a little bit of an affectation of trying to swing the ball away, and he had to run in and run through, and then he did everything a bit quicker, you know, a bit more aggressively. And I think he didn't like it, but he would react to it in that sort of way. And it took me a while to realize with Bob, who seemed to be, you know, was also, you know, tremendous competitor, of course, and very and they're capable of great aggression, proper aggression as a fast bowler. I didn't realize that he could become, if he wasn't on top form, more unsure of himself, more unsettled. So things like that could unsettle him from within his own team or from his own captain or colleagues. And it took me a while to realize that, you know, it was very important to encourage him, to build him up, as it were, on occasions. I mean, I don't want to make too much of it, because of course he was a resilient character. He was a test match bowler for 13 or 14 years. He was one of our best fast bowlers ever. He was a strong character, but he had those moments of insecurity, put it that way. I mean,
Yes.
to some extent, but how do you, I mean, to come back, we were talking before about Geoffrey Boycott, and for a very, very, very fine player, he also needed to be reassured more than I would have anticipated until I got closer to him. You know, that he needed to be told that the ball that had just got him out would have got anyone out in the history of cricket. You know, that would be one. And, but another thing would be to say to him, you know, look, keep doing it your way. It's going to come good. You know, don't try and do anything different. Just keep going. It'll come good. You're a good enough player. You've done it before. You've come back from little bad patches before. Though Ian said to him once, as a junior, relatively still junior player in Australia, 1978-9, he said to him, look, when you're at your best, you're like a dancer or a boxer in the ring. You're light on your feet. And he was getting stuck on the crease, and he was getting hit by short pitch balls, and shoulder or his side, or, you know, getting into trouble with the ball, which he was a fine player of the short ball. And so Ian said to him, you know, try and get a bit lighter. And Geoffrey, having sneered a bit at this young upstart telling him anything about his own skill, took it on and tried to be a little bit more sort of light on his feet. And I think, you know, so you could say, if you then tolerated the comeback, as I had to do with Ian at times, you know, I had to make him bowl in the nets when he thought he didn't need to bowl. And he'd sometimes come and bowl bouncers at me, or sneer at me every time he got me out in the nets. But at least he was doing some bowling, I thought. And, you know, come to see that probably I was right.
Yes.
Possibly.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yes. Well, that's all fascinating. Let's take a quick breather from you, Mike, and bring in Roger Knight, because yes. Roger was the secretary of MCC in 2000 at the point this preamble was first created. And so he will have been aware of the conversations behind the scenes that led them to introduce this original preamble, which has since been reduced in size and made simpler. And in your book, you've got it down to 45 words, which we'll come back to later. But
I'd be very interested to hear what Roger says about it. Yeah.
Can we play him in?
Hello, Stephen.
Hello, Roger. Right. Well, you remember this well at the time, don't you, Roger? The discussions that led up to creating this preamble.
I do. Mike's absolutely right. There was a lot of concern about club cricket and the way that behaviour was deteriorating. And both Colin Cowdrey and Ted Dexter felt that something needed to be said. I think we all felt that in the past, everybody understood in their own way what was meant by the spirit of cricket, but clearly there were different interpretations. And so we started almost from scratch and said, right, what do we mean? And we started off by saying, should we give the umpires red and yellow cards so that they become the arbiters in the game? It happens in football, it happens in rugby. You give somebody a whistle and they're in charge. And there was a very strong feeling, and Colin particularly, I think, was keen on this, was that the captains and the players bore that responsibility. That was the thing that he felt, made cricket different from other team sports. And so we started there, and it was then very easy for us all to sit down, and there was quite a large group of people who started saying, well, thou shalt not do this and thou shalt not do that. And we ended up with about 10 things that we shouldn't do. And David Richards, who was the ICC chief executive at the time, was part of the group. And he said, we can't make the spirit of cricket all negative. We need to reverse it and look at what is the positive way of doing things. And so the word that came to mind was respect. And as you know, the original Spirit of Cricket preamble talked about the respect for your own captain and team, your respect for the opponents, respect for the authority or the role of the umpires, and respect for the past traditions of the game. But of course, once you put that, you then have to start defining everything. And there was a very good comment that I read a while ago, which said, actually, it's the wrong way round. Most people respect their own captain and their own team. You should really start from the other end and say, we need to respect the game, whatever that means. We then need to respect the authority and the decision-making of the officials, the umpires. We need to respect our opponents. And respect is an interesting word, isn't it? I mean, it's been a lot debated recently at Cambridge about respect and tolerance. What is the difference? Do you respect everybody's view or do you tolerate it? And I think we came down to the fact that the spirit of cricket needed everybody at the top level to agree some sort of a norm. And we got the test match captains of the time together, and they agreed that we should have the players and the captains made responsible or kept responsible rather than the umpires. So we did away with the idea at that stage of red and yellow cards. And of course, the other thing to remember is that the laws and the spirit that goes alongside it is there or are there for the whole game, not just for the international game, but for every level of the game, where in some cases the umpires might be the number 11 batsman or somebody who has absolutely no qualification to umpire. So it would be very difficult to change the whole emphasis and put the umpires entirely in charge. And I think the agreed norm is very important. But of course, that agreed norm is difficult to achieve.
Mm-hmm. Mike, do you want to come back in on that?
Well, very interesting what Roger says. And first of all, I wanted to say something that Rodney Marsh said, who's, I think, is a very straight man, plays the game in a very straight way. And and values. But he said he didn't like the word spirit much, but maybe that's what we mean by playing hard but fair. So there's something about the word spirit that some people don't like. I mean, I have no objection to the word spirit in this sort of context at all. But that was one thing I thought. The second thing was Doug Insole, became a friend of mine, and who was the cricket chairman for the Test and County Cricket Board for many, many years. Used to say to the county captains every year, Roger will probably remember, you can drive a coach and horses through the laws of cricket, but that's not the end point. You can, in other words, if you want to, you can subtly or in round the back ways, you can defeat the purpose of a rule, of a law or a rule. And so I think it was in the air for some years before, but it had obviously got to a point where people thought they should do something about it, which I'm in favor of. I wasn't always in favor of it, but I am in favor of the preamble or a preamble. And the other thing I was going to say to what Roger said was this interesting thing about respect and tolerance, and how respect can sometimes be over respect, or some people have to earn your respect as well, as captains or as umpires or as opposition for that matter. So you set off with that and you hope that people will earn it. But of course, if they behave outrageously or ignore the team, then they lose their right to your respect.
Roger, did in the aftermath of writing that, did it have a noticeable effect?
I think at the top level, things were improving anyway, and the captains of the test sides were very much in favour and tried to play in the way in which we hoped the game would be played. Whether it changed much further down, I'm not sure. I think, as Mike says in his book, it is very much to do with the climate of the time and the approach of the time to moral values, to what the boundaries are. I mean, everybody has a limit. They know how far they can go in certain actions or thoughts or speech. And parents provide, they now talk about it all the time, boundaries for the children. School teachers talk about boundaries. But of course, in schools at the time that played cricket, there was a move slightly away from the old-fashioned schoolmaster who believed in good moral values for every approach to everything, towards the cricket coaches being in charge and bringing with them the importance of winning. And it happened, I think, at county level, where you had more managers taking over. So they were, their job was there on the basis of them winning, or the team winning. So I think things had started to change, not necessarily for the better, but it's a very difficult thing to isolate and to define, I think. I agree with Mike about the spirit may not be the right term. I agree it's play hard, play fair, but as Rod Marsh said, what is hard, what is fair? And the trouble is, every time you say anything or you try and lay it out in writing, there is a definition behind it or needed. And that, I think, was always the issue. I think it's better now probably than when it was written in 2000, the preamble. It's shorter. I agree, the shorter it can be, the better it is. But just going back to one of the points which Mike made about walking. The spirit of cricket doesn't say whether walking is right or walking is wrong, because there isn't an agreed norm. I think Gary Sobers would say he couldn't understand why people don't walk all the time. He always did. And I think others will say, as Mike does, I think it's important that we all do one thing or the other. But the difficulty is getting people to buy into it. And in some ways, I think you have to go back to the game and say, what actually antagonises the most things. Is it not walking? Is it violence? Is it verbal abuse? Is it corruption? Is it cheating? And you've got all of those things which can lead to aggravation on the field. And I think the other thing is, we always talk about the captains, the players, and the umpires. Sometimes we need to think, what do the supporters think is the right way to behave? We don't always put that into our thinking, and that certainly didn't come into the thinking in 2000 at all. It was to do with the players, it was to do with the captains, and it was to do with the umpires.
Now, in your book, Mike, you actually talk about the spirit of the crowd, or the lack of spirit of the crowd, when they booed Steve Smith when he was over here in 2019.
Yes, yes, and especially, and they were kinder to him than they were to David Warner. Who averaged 9.75 in that.
Yes.
But still, yes. No, there was some. I thought it was. Well, you know, these young men had done something wrong. You know, with the sandpaper, and they'd done something second rate, and they'd got serious in the context of the game and in the context of the expected penalties for ball tampering, a serious punishment for year's ban, two of them anyway, Warner and Smith. And they'd served it, and they'd come back, they'd apologized, they'd broken down on TV, they'd been humiliated in public, they'd gone through a great deal, in my view. And it seemed to me that I came across it a few times at cricket matches at Lord's, of people saying they weren't punished enough. Why should they ever come back? You know, that sort of thing. And then you get the things that you're talking about, the booing, the Indian crowds having a go at Smith on the boundary, and Kohli standing up against, on behalf of his opponent, in behalf of Smith, which I admired very much. And I think that, you know, we get a second chance. We need a second chance in cricket, you know, two innings matches. And sometimes you need more than one chance anyway. And in life too, you know, I think it's against the spirit of fair play to go on jeering, hammering, being nasty to people who've done their term. It's like someone comes out of prison and he's never forgiven, you know.
Yes. Now we're coming to the end of we're about to play in the audience, but before we do that, I'll just chip in one last thing, and it is about the amount of talk in the field. Towards the end of my playing time, when I was about 60, playing on a club third 11, a boy aged 15 with an unbroken voice turned up as our wicket keeper. He went to public school and he was in his county age group squad.
Yeah.
So he was having that kind of input into how to play cricket.
Yeah.
And he spent the whole afternoon making derogatory remarks about the adult batsman he was standing behind the stumps to, and created quite a lot of tension in the game. And this was somebody who'd been taught this was how you were to play the game.
Yes. Well, it's very disappointing. And you know, somebody needed to take hold of him and tell him a few home truths, and tell him to wait till he grew up a bit.
Yes, but whether we could have done that, given the input he was getting from his school and his county squad.
Very difficult. No, that's a sad thing. I'm not sure how general that would be, actually. Sounds like a bad case. You know?
It was a bad case.
I mean, it's not...
but it's probably a bit more widespread than we would like it to be. I
agree, but there would be many coaches like the person we greatly respected and loved, Tom Cartwright.
He walked onto the pitch once, Tom Cartwright, and told them that if he heard another word from any of them, none of them would ever play again.
Yes, and I got the same response from people like John Inverarity and Rob Marsh about, you know, all this shouting and negative talk and this. The thing that puts the other side off, Rob Marsh said, was that you bowl better and field better.
Well, I think in the days of, I don't know, you probably did play against Bill Alley, but they
Yes,
always
I did.
reckoned that the way to undermine Bill Alley was to stay silent and not join in his
Yes,
conversation.
that's right. There were a few people like that. There was a chap called Gordon Barker who played for Essex. He was a very cheery opening batsman, and he loved to chat to the fielders. And we had this idea that he didn't like it if you get quiet. So we tried it for a while. I don't think it made the slightest difference, but anyway.
Maybe we should just quickly bring in John Barclay now to
John.
complete our set of county captains of the 40 years ago. Have we got John in here?
Maybe not.
Is he with us? No, no sign. Okay. Right. Well, this has been a fascinating hour. But before we finish, let me just read your version of how you would like. This is what you would like the preamble to say. Your 45 words. All those involved in cricket should respect the integrity of the game. On the field and off it, the spirit of cricket asks us to play hard but fair. And let's not lose the essence of the word play.